I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100.
Hey, so this is our crash course on tracking. I wanted to get this out before we got on the ground with dogs. So I'm going to go over some like really basic stuff, and I'm sure you guys know a lot of this, but it's always good to have a little bit of a refresher, and it's good to kind of know the bottom line anyway. So before we go into everything that has to do with handling a tracking dog, what I want to do is get into definitions of things and the science of odor, everything else as it pertains to a tracking canine. And from there, how do we use that to successfully hunt a person? So, to get us started, trailing is the trained behavior and ability of a canine to pick out and follow a unique human odor under varying environmental conditions and distractions. Whereas tracking is the art of following visual cues and disturbances left by an individual. This can also refer to a canine who only works ground odor and will not leave the ground odor to just get the job done. So if you think about it, we should be using both when it comes to real life tracks and finding people. When you're out there with your dogs, you guys are a team, so help your dog out when you can. Ground odor is the unique odor left behind where a human has walked. This includes things like crushed vegetation, the scent that you get when you step in a big pile of dog crap, things that we leave behind when we step on stuff. Human odor is a unique combination of skin rafts, sweat, endocrine odors, and personal odors. So every person has their own individual funk that is very distinguishable for a dog. So our hormones and stress levels can also alter our scent, and there's a few instances in the tracking world where this is going to matter a lot. The average dog is going to be more excited about hunting a stressed individual. For instance, somebody running from the cops, they're going to be dropping a lot of that stress hormone, and it's going to be a very easy track for the dog. Whereas hunting somebody that suffers from Alzheimer's is going to be a much harder track because, you know, in their mind, they're just on a walk and they're really not dropping any of that stress scent. They're not dropping any sort of scared. They're just out having a good time. Well, not really a good time. That's why we're out hunting them. But you get what I'm saying. So, with that being said, we need to know that 90% of our human odor is not going to be in the footsteps of the track as we see it with our eyes. So this leads me to part 2, which is going to be all about reading odor and reading your environment to help your tracking dog out. As we're talking about how the weather influences our track, one of the first things we're going to think about is heat and cold. So just like the old adage goes, heat rises, and this is true on the track as well. So in hotter temperatures, you're going to see typically dogs raising their head a little bit more on the track while they're working, but also your track is going to disappear a lot faster because it is going up into the air faster than it would be if it was cold and sticking to the ground. So your moisture levels as well as your humidity levels are going to be a great help for you. So you can see in this picture the dew sticking to the grass, or, you know, just go outside in the morning and you'll see the dew sticking to the grass. Your odor is going to be doing the same thing in these conditions. So humid conditions, like we have in the South, are going to be way better for tracking than, say, desert where it's really dry and the odor doesn't have a lot to stick to. When it's humid, the air is thick, the air is heavy, and so it's going to weigh down the odor. The next thing we need to talk about is wind and wind direction. I found that the easiest way to visually understand what's going on with the odor around us in the world is to watch footage or acquire smoke bombs. In a lot of ways, odor and smoke work very similar. Now watch how the wind immediately starts picking that smoke up and bringing it to the left. You'll also start seeing in that little divot where the odor is pooling. So if this were a track, we'd see that these divots in the ground have odor in them and more pockets of odor that are available to our dogs. Then we need to start thinking about not only natural wind, but man-made wind as well. So look at this rally car and look at what it's doing with the smoke. It's swirling. It's doing all this crazy stuff. So when you get to something like this, it kind of wreaks havoc on you. These are all things that we have to keep in mind when we're reading our dog's tracking behavior. So just to recap here, your best tracking conditions are going to be when it's cold, when it's humid, and when there's not a whole lot of wind. So that leads us to our next part of reading odor, which is our surfaces. So our easiest tracks are going to be in long grass or heavily vegetated areas. Anything that has a lot of vegetation is going to hold a lot of moisture, which will in turn hold a lot of odor. Our urban environments tend to be a little trickier because, one, we can't read the ground. You cannot see footsteps in asphalt. And your odor and your winds and your people driving by are going to push that odor into the sides of the building. Just imagine like waves crashing against the side of a cliff. It's sort of the same thing when it comes to odor there. And it's going to be lost a lot faster. So knowing what we know, we're going to have a little scenario here. I'm going to just say that our person walked down this sidewalk. So as you can see to the left, you have a neighborhood street, and to the right, you have a wall, and the path is surrounded by vegetation on both sides. For the sake of this, let's say that this is a pretty popular street. People drive up and down it all the time. So with that being said, where do we think the odor from the track is going to be? Well, more than likely, you're going to see a dog that is tracking to the right towards the wall. So you have your traffic pushing that odor that way. The wall is blocking the odor from really escaping there. And luckily, next to the wall, we have a bunch of vegetation. So more than likely, the track will fall to the right. So moving forward, let's talk about gathering our scent article. In a lot of search and rescue applications, you will have access to the family. You will have access to the missing person stuff. However, there are calls that you don't. So I'm going to show you the best chances to get a decent scent article and where to find your best scratch-offs. So step one for every single article that you'll ever gather is always wear gloves. This prevents contamination from you and gives you the best option on the purest scent article that you can get from the victim. So your best options, if you have access to the house, is look at the victim's dirty laundry. You want either the dirty socks or underwear because that'll have the most scent. Pillowcases usually don't get touched either and will have a ton of the victim's scent. And recently heavily worn shoes. Now you can find out if they've been recently worn by talking to the family. Of course, you can also go with shirts, used bath towels, anything that will have the odor of our target person on it. Now, if they left from a vehicle and you have access to the inside, chances are the first thing that the cops are going to do is tear into that vehicle. So you have contamination present already because most cops don't really know how to maintain the odor at a crime scene. So with that being said, the seats, the center console, the glove box, anywhere that a cop would have touched is off limits for us as far as gathering a scent article. So there's a few things that we got to pay attention to. So obviously the person had to have driven there. So the steering wheel is a really good option. More than likely, no one has touched the interior door handle or the armrest. That's also a really good spot because most people will rest their arm there, and he or she had to have exited the vehicle somewhere. So instead of ripping your steering wheel out, what you're going to do is you're going to carry around 4x4 sterile gauze pads in your pack. From there, you're going to place your sterile gauze pad with your gloves on, either on the interior door handle or on the steering wheel. After that, you're going to close the vehicle and wait 10 to 15 minutes. At that point, your gauze will have absorbed enough odor that a dog will be able to pick up on it. So, of course, after you gather either a clothing article, pillowcase, towel, whatever, or you have a gauze pad article, you're going to place it in either a Ziploc bag or a glass mason jar. The glass mason jar is the better option because it's less porous and more sterile. However, carrying around mason jars in your pack is not always practical. So do what you need to do. The Ziploc bags work fine too. So what happens when you don't have access to either the victim's house or inside of the vehicle? So let's say all the windows on this Jag are closed, the car is locked. What do we do? So the answer to this is we're going to use the seams of the vehicle. Now, when you're driving down the road, you're creating an odor pool in your car, and your seams and windows are going to have odor spilling out of it. And because everyone and their mom has tried to open the car at this point by touching the handle with their dirty, ungloved hands, we're not even going to think about that door handle. So in red is probably the best seam to get an article off of. Now, if the seams are too tight to be able to shove a little piece of gauze sideways there to let it cook for 10 minutes, what you're going to do is you're going to bring your dog to the vehicle and send her directly on that seam. So why do we need a good article? One, so we know we're not tracking the wrong dude. Contaminated articles mean the start will be unclear to the dog, and bad starts usually don't make for successful tracks. So, coming into part 4, I'm going to brush up a little bit on gear and what gear I like and what makes sense to me. So, let's talk harnesses. This here is a weight pulling dog. Obviously, we're not going to go out and track with a weight pull harness, but I just wanted to show you some stuff. So, this harness has a rear center of gravity, which obviously when the dog is pulling with all of his might, his head is going towards the ground. So my thoughts are, if I want my dog to be looking for ground odor, I want to have a harness that's going to help get the headset that I want. So you can see this is a bite work dog, and her harness is helping her be upward and forward, which is something we don't necessarily want with a tracking dog. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these harnesses whatsoever, obviously, but in my head, if I'm going to be tracking somebody down for miles and miles, I don't want to take away or be fighting my dog. At any point, I want it to be really just natural for them. If they're pulling in, they're getting farther on the ground. Now, as far as brands I like and stuff, Julius Canine has a man-trailing harness that checks a lot of my boxes. There's no such thing as a perfect harness. Nobody's made it yet. I think that one's really good. I have a Georgia Canine harness, and I really like it because it's got a ton of padding. But what I don't like is the attachment is too high up. Now you're going to want a 20 to 30 foot long line. I prefer my leather one. It's kind of a pain in the ass to take care of though. Like if you are tracking through the swamp, you're going to have to oil the leash, and it's kind of a pain in the neck. The Biothane ones are nice, and of course the nylon is probably my third choice because I have gotten some serious rope burn from those, but it's all about preference. I will also take a Camelback, the kind that has a little bit more backpack to it, so I have enough water for myself and my dog. I will also carry a first aid kit, lighter, Benadryl, and I will have cigarettes because you can light it and see which way the wind is blowing. It's also a really good bargaining tool. You know, if you're dealing with somebody that's kind of nuts, and you can talk them down with a cigarette. So I figured at this point, if you're still hanging on after 15 minutes, I'm just gonna start reading the dictionary from the start. Just kidding. So you've got your article. You've talked to the cops. You've gathered as much information as you possibly can about the person that you're looking for, what direction they went in, medical issues that could be pertinent to them being missing, and any kind of mental thing they might have going on. Basically, the more you know, the better off you're going to be. So from there, if you have a direction, what you're going to do is you're going to set your article on the ground. A lot of the old school guys would put their article in a Ziploc bag and put the whole bag over the dog's nose. But what happens there is the dog starts fighting it, and you don't want a bad reaction to the article. So when I bring the dog to the article, I'm going to be telling them how great they are. Good job, good job, good job. That's the one. You know, they're not always going to have this big of a reaction, but you want it to be a strong and happy reaction. So now we're going to talk about handling the leash for a tracking dog, which is a little different than pretty much everything else you'll do with a leash dog. So probably the biggest thing to keep in mind is that we don't want the dog to get to the end of the leash and look like this.
It hasn't been a roll to remember.
So ideally you want the leash to have even pressure the whole way, and you want to be able to feed the leash out and feed the leash back in. So you don't want a whole lot of loose. You want it just to remain evenly tight the whole time, which is a lot harder than it sounds. And the quieter you can be with your leash, the less of a distraction you are to your dog. So the next thing I want to talk about is how far away should you be from the dog? And that really depends on the environment. If it's heavily urban, a lot of traffic, I'm pretty close, probably 8 feet, like enough where if I need to, I can pull my dog, you know, physically off the track. But if I'm in a more wooded or secluded environment, I'm going to be at about 20, 25 feet. Basically, the main thing is I don't want to be a distraction or get in the way of my dog doing his job. So the next parts come when we're actually on the track. The dog is moving. The dog has a lot of forward motion. Now it's up to us to read what is going on. So you can tell when a dog is really on it because they're just going to keep on trucking. That movement is a good thing. They'll stop when they're either crittering or they're having a hard time figuring it out. But most of the time when they do stop on the track and aren't moving forward, when they're still looking for their person, they're going to start bracketing left and right or making circles to try to find that track again. Another thing we'll be looking for is emotional responses of the dog. So a lot of dogs will really start using their tail, will start using different breathing patterns, and will also start changing their pace the closer you're getting. Another thing too is they'll also start changing their headset. Some dogs will start looking towards where the person is. So this is all things to keep in mind. The dog is telling us everything we need to know. So when you see your dog go from we're trucking along, we're finding it, to oh crap, we gotta go, at that point it's time to start getting ready to come up on somebody. So how do you tell if your dog missed a turn? They will start bracketing, as I mentioned before, or they're gonna look pretty confused. They're going straight, and then all of a sudden they kind of look up left and right like, what the heck, where did it go? The more time you get under your belt tracking with your particular dog, the more you're going to notice and find these little nuances that are pretty much present in every single tracking dog. So thanks for hanging out and watching this today, and I hope you guys got something from it. So I'll see you soon.